business can get personal for sure. And when people really, really, really understand who they are and who each other are, it can take that personal stuff out.
Yes.
And to me, that is a huge gift you can give yourself and give your other family members. And even those who are not family members sitting around the table with you.
Welcome to Powered by Instinct, a podcast for professionals who think about how your fundamental nature drives performance. In each episode, Kolby experts will interview top performers, team leaders, consultants, and coaches to discuss identifying team members' strengths, aligning those strengths with their jobs, and optimizing individual and team performance. If you're interested in getting more done more naturally, then let's jump in.
Welcome to Powered by Instinct, everyone. I'm Amy Bruske. I'm the president and integrator at Kolby Corp. And I'm excited about today's topic because we are going to talk about family business. For those of you that don't know, Kolby Corp is a family business, so I am living this every day. It's a topic we're really passionate about because we have seen how when things go wrong, really the ramifications of what happens to not only a family, but a business all at the same time. Yes, we've had to fire a cousin before. That wasn't great. So we have lived all of the challenges. So we're excited about sharing some of our learnings with you. Because of that, Kathy Kolbe and I wrote a book several years ago called Business is Business, about how we can take some of these lessons that we've learned and our clients have learned along the way and put them into action. But so I thought it would be really interesting to bring in a true expert, someone that does this all the time and works with family businesses to discuss some of the trends, some of the challenges, really give us some ideas on how to make sure that we're preventing some of these things from happening. So today I'm excited to bring you the fabulous Sara B. the expert on this topic. This is who I go to on this topic. And let me just tell you, I love this quote that Sara uses from her website. She helps businesses figure out where they're going, how they will get there, and be more healthy when they do it. And Sara, if I am right, you're also an EOS implementer. You spend a lot of your time doing that. For those of you that don't know, EOS stands for Entrepreneurial Operating System. We run on EOS. Sara is an expert in using those tools in your business. So, Sara, welcome.
Thanks for having me here. I'm so excited to talk about family business with a person in a family business about a tool that helps family businesses. Could it get more meta? I don't think it could.
As a quick reminder, my Kolby is a 3583. Sara is a 5691, and we're going to dig into that a little bit later. So let's talk about the important work that you do. Let's start there. And whenever people hear about family business, I think that they are surprised to learn what % of businesses in the US are actually family businesses. And I know when Kathy and I were doing research for the book, we were really surprised too. So those of you listening, if you're not in a family business now or have never been, you certainly know someone that is. So keep in mind, this isn't just generations of family in the business. It can just be a spousal relationship running the business, whatever it might be. Do you remember what that % is, or what do you see, Sara, for % of businesses in the U.S.?
In the U.S., it's 2/3 of the companies. It's 66 or 68%, something like that. So I just call it 2/3. That number is higher in Canada. In parts of Asia and Africa, that number is higher than 90%. Even though it's 2/3 in the US, that's sort of low when you look around the world.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we are talking about this incredible high % of businesses that are dealing with some of these things. And there are things that they can do to anticipate the challenges that almost all of these businesses go through and handle that well. And if I remember right, you were in a family business. Tell us about that.
Yeah, my dad and my uncle were auto repair mechanics. My mom and my aunt helped run the business. They took turns, week on in the business, week off with the kids when my sisters and my cousins and I were little. And then, of course, for any of your listeners who grew up in a family business, you all know, I don't know, maybe it was not true for you and your sibling, but lots of people in family business work in their family business, but they don't get paid. So I actually got my first paycheck from a family business that paid me. Of course, my own did not. I wouldn't say I was particularly helpful, but I did work around there quite a bit. So I've had lots of jobs in family businesses and then served a lot of family businesses as an implementer as well.
That's a really good point. I know David Kolby. I have actually been at Kolby Corp. So I am Kathy Kolby's stepdaughter. David and I own the business together, and he's my stepbrother. He came to work at Kolby as an adult much later than I did, but he always says that doesn't count because I was working in the warehouse as an unpaid intern when I was a little kid. Like, believe me, I've been in this family business longer, which is fair. So, and there's some interesting things about just growing up in that environment, but you were still willing to go work for family businesses after seeing your own, which is interesting. Tell me, why are you so passionate about it? You work with rapidly growing businesses through EOS. Some are family businesses, some are not. Tell me about the work that you do and why you care about this so much.
Yeah. Well, EOS, as you said, it stands for the Entrepreneurial Operating System. I get to work with teams that have between 10 and 250 employees. Some are, I won't even call them first generation. They're founder owned. They're trying to move really fast. And over my 10 years of doing this work, nearly 90% of my clients have had, like you said, a family business component, whether it's siblings, cousins, people are married to each other, or multiple generations. And I came to this work because my parents, they were hippies in the 60s and the 70s, and they instilled in me that I needed to grow up and do something positive on this planet. And when I started to see how many family businesses there are on this planet and realized that, most adults have to go to work, it occurred to me that helping family businesses be healthier places would mean that I would help make families healthier, help make classrooms healthier, right? The classrooms of the kids whose parents are working in these businesses. And that's what really got my attention when I started doing this work with family businesses, that I could, with doing my work, that my Kolby actually reinforced as the right work to be doing, that would actually make a really positive difference, literally across communities.
Well, that's a great way to look at it so globally, because your whole point is it's even affecting the kids whose parents maybe own a business or those kinds of things. It reaches so much more than the people who are actually employed by the business. There's all these other people touched by it as well. And when your livelihood is completely tied to your job, it is different. It is not just I might lose my job and therefore this income goes away. It is sometimes an individual plus an entire extended family that's livelihoods are tied to the business. So we have to ensure that it's continuing on and it's successful. So that's huge. Is there anything you can think of that you wish you would have known back when you were working in your own, either your own family business or these other family businesses you were working with that you know now?
The biggest thing that I wish I had known then, that I do know now, and that I talk about often, is this concept called the 3-circle model of the family business. That comes out of Harvard. It was discovered, invented, coined, named in the late 70s. It's this basic concept. It's 3 circles in a Venn diagram. I always come prepared, with the ugliest thing I can come up with.
Love it.
For those of you who are watching, you can see just a 3-circle Venn diagram. For those of you who are listening, just imagine 3 circles that overlap in the middle. Those 3 circles in a family business represent 3 systems that are at play. One is the family, of course, that makes sense. The other is the business, and that, of course, makes sense too. But the third thing is ownership. That's the 3rd circle. And what a lot of family businesses do is they accidentally put all 3 of those circles on top of each other. And they say things to me like, well, I can't fire my brother. But of course you can't fire your brother. You would never fire your brother from the family circle. But you might have to fire your brother, or like you mentioned, your cousin in the business circle. And just because you're an owner doesn't mean you're guaranteed a spot in the business. That kind of separating those relationships is so profound for people when they really get their arms wrapped around it. And until then, it can accidentally make a family business a wildly stressful, highly dysfunctional nightmare for people whose names are above the door. So that made a big difference for me. And I've seen it make a huge difference for so many of my clients over the years.
That is so great. One of the things that Kathy and I talked about a lot in the book, which seemed so straightforward, is about establishing boundaries and little things like You don't call your parents, if you're working with your parents, you don't call them mom and dad at the office. And to us, that seemed really straightforward. To other people, that's strange. But you don't want to sit in a meeting with clients or vendors and be calling someone mom or dad. And I remember when my kids were little, they didn't like that I was calling grandma and grandpa by their first names. They thought that was strange. But we had talked about that setup. So what I love about what you're saying is when you look at these three circles, you know which role you're playing when. When I am in a meeting, if I am working for the business right now, I am the employee in the business or a leader, whatever it might be. Yeah. But then I'm on I've got family dinner an hour from this meeting. Now I'm family, and just being able to make sure that you're staying in those roles as appropriate is really huge. And yeah, we'll talk about succession and having to fire people and those things along the way, because yeah, you might have to fire someone out of the business, but not out of the family. And we feel really strongly that you have to set that up ahead of time. You've got to have if you're going to bring a family member into the business, right? What's the exit plan? What does this look like? Yes. Kathy and I did that. We said, what's the worst case scenario? And if this doesn't work out, what does that look like? And she was just so smart about figuring that out, so that we said, okay, we're still going to be okay. But if it doesn't work for the business, that's okay too. So are there any other challenges you can see? So I love that the Harvard model is the learning. Are there any really common challenges that you see in family businesses that are unique to that scenario?
Yes is the answer to your question. I'll talk about the most common that I see, and there's so many others that come along with it. But I would say the most common thing I see is families accidentally do this. They accidentally make their org chart, or as we say in EOS, their accountability chart, look remarkably like their family tree. They do it all the time. Okay, well, dad must be the visionary, and mom must be the integrator, and sister must be, the head of HR, and brother must be the head of sales, like that kind of thing. It's just an accidental thing they do. And when they can actually look at people's Kolby, when they can actually look at what does the business need, they can say things like, oh my gosh, we're maybe not even the right people to run this company at all. We need to find people who aren't family members. Or what were we thinking? Mom's actually the visionary, the sister's actually the head of sales, and the brother should be mowing the lawn or whatever, right? They undo that idea of the family tree and start running the company, like a company. But until then, they do this, they do exactly what I said, which can be very tricky and very for everyone.
It's a good challenge for all of some of where you might have preconceived notions, or you have underlying biases that you don't even know about. We've worked with an owner of a company, a fairly large company, that was transitioning, and he just assumed his son would be the CEO, and he was not the right person. It was the daughter that was the right person. We were able to help identify that, not only with Kolby, but for all of you listening that know about the three parts of the mind, we really need to ensure it's the right fit cognitively. This person either has the skills or can get the skills. They're capable, in other words, of doing it. Affectively, personality-wise, they are motivated. They love the business. They have the right passion. They have the right personality to be in whatever that role is. And that third piece you just mentioned is sometimes by looking at the Kolby indexes, there's times in the business life cycle where a certain type of strength is really what's needed. And so if you can always be looking at three parts of the mind fit, like you said, you might even say, I need to hire a CEO. I'm not the right person to do that. And I think people do that all the time. I remember hearing Gino Wickman, the founder of EOS, he had said, I knew that I could get the business to this certain point. And once it hit this point in the growth, I wasn't the person anymore. And I don't think a lot of people say that. He said, I don't want to run a company that's this size. My sweet spot is that, this startup and this growth to a certain level. And he said, I'm out. Just when it was, most people would be like, what are you talking about? You just did all this work to get it to this amazing point. You don't leave now. Now you get to enjoy how much help you have, right? And these dynamite people. But I think that's incredibly intuitive and like really thinking rationally about that decision. So tell me a little bit more about any challenges that you've seen focusing on someone's strengths. At Kolby, we identify everyone's strengths in getting things done and solving problems and executing. What have you seen Kolby help solve along the way, or what ahas have people got?
Do we have 17 hours? Let me tell you just a couple that were really big for me. I was working with a founder dad, and his 2 daughters. And he was a high implementer. He loved to touch his work. He loved to interact with his work. And it really informed the way he thought about the business, the way he was able to sell the business. And I don't mean how he sold the business because he was selling it to his daughters. I mean how he sold the concept of the business. Being able to get in there and work with things made a big difference. Neither of his daughters had that high implementer, but he had it in his head that they needed to be out in the field every single day. Otherwise, they wouldn't understand the business. And it was when we looked at their Kolbe indexes that he was able to realize that they had a completely different way they would learn the business, and that their way was actually going to help accelerate the business just as quickly as his way, if not faster. That was a major moment. They were fighting back and forth. Dad, why do I need to do this? Then they figured that out.
That is a common thing that we see all the time too. So I'm glad you're bringing this up, is just knowing if you are the founder, and let's talk about succession now, because that's a huge piece of it. Whoever is coming in the business may not have the same strengths that you do. And yet, without knowing what those are specifically, it is kind of human nature that the person who has years of experience and is going to mentor this person is saying, hey, this worked for me. There is one right way to do things, and it's well-meaning. It's, hey, here's how I've gotten to this point. Impose that on someone where that is not going to be successful for them long-term. And then there's this whole value and judgment around how well is this person taking the business over. So not only do those 2 people involved need to know the strengths, but so does everyone around them. Right? The rest of the business needs to understand that this person is bringing something different to the table, and here's the way they're going to manage. And hopefully the freedom to build a team around you so that everything gets covered. It's not like that's not important, but yeah, they can't just all of a sudden pretend have these amazing initiating implementer strengths out of the blue. If that's not your way of doing things, we're going to take them out of their game. That's that's such a great example.
Oh, good. It was a watershed moment literally in their father-daughter relationship, and also in their how do we run this business relationship. I mean, it was a major moment for everyone. It was starting to look like Dad didn't trust his kids. And that wasn't the case at all. It was Dad didn't understand their method of learning, interacting, growing inside of their career.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that goes down all the time. And that's also a good reminder that you may, if you're a founder or the person running or owning the business right now, you may not be the best mentor for whoever's coming up. You may have to bring in some other people or get them connected with other people who do lead in the way that they do to help them out, because there's just this natural emulation, as I was saying, along the way. So you might need other types of mentors along the way. Yeah, that's a great Kolbe story. Let me know if you have any others. Like you said, it could be 17 hours, but otherwise, I want to talk a little bit about succession planning, because frankly, that's where we find some of the biggest pain points are. And we already talked about it's not necessarily the son or the daughter or whoever you're assuming is the person. We really do need to look at the strengths. What else goes along with this succession planning? And we know that there's some statistics about second generation and third generation and how things go poorly along the way. Tell me what you found are the biggest challenges, and what do we do about that?
I would say the first challenge, and this is something that dawned on me in the last 6 months, is people like to talk about how the family business is killed by the third generation. Somebody recently asked me, Sarah, do you think it's the second generation who kills it or the third? And I paused for a second, and I actually surprised myself with my answer. My answer was, I think it's the first. And this is what I mean by this. If the first generation creates a business that is not being run thoughtfully, or they're not really looking at the skills of their team and is the skill growing with the size of the company, it's almost like having a sports team where half the people have injuries, and then you hand over, like you've got first quarter or whatever, the coach, and then you hand over this injured team for the second quarter that's already behind. And then when the third, coach comes in, you're 50 points down. How are you ever going to catch up? But we blame it on the third generation, which really bums me out supremely. I really believe that what it comes down to is the founder and then the next generation and the next generation truly understanding their skills and abilities and what gives them energy And that's what I love so much about the Kolby, is that understanding of what will give you energy versus take your energy. And lots of founders are absolutely in a role that gives them energy. And often that does not include firing people, making good processes,
Right.
getting rid of your high school buddy, right? Those things that are really hard to do that actually hurt the business if you don't take care of it. And if you give that business with all of those issues to a next generation and say, do it like I did, it just gets further behind. And so in the end, I think it really is the know thyself that is number one. It probably in any business, but absolutely in family business. That's the number one thing that'll make a positive difference.
That's a really good point. I mean, the first generation, the lack of planning and seeing ahead and really thinking through everything that they have to do to hand it to another person or group of people who don't have the same strengths, there's a lot that needs to be done. That's interesting because we really do talk about the third generation by then just dropping it. And I think there's a lot of different reasons for that. The few things that I've seen, I don't know what the statistics show, but I think one thing we don't measure is it's almost just a given that next generation is going to come in and they don't have passion for it. They don't have, or they just, it's not using their strengths well or whatever it is. So really making sure that the person that's there is there because they were the right person. This is the person that's the right person to do this. And if there isn't that person, don't force it on your family. Because man, talk about taking over a company because of guilt, because it has to stay a family-run business. That's just a huge challenge. And that's not fair to do to anyone that's coming in future generations, I guess.
It's terrible. I've talked to way too many second, third, fourth generation family business owners who, when I ask them, why do you own the business? Their answer is because. And that answer does not get you through the hard days. It maybe doesn't even really get you through the good days.
Right. Because it was there. Yeah. That's terrible. And if the business just lives, this is where you have to decide, right? Some people have lifestyle businesses. The business exists to make sure that we're paid and we can do the things that we do that support our lifestyle. And if that's what you're doing, no problem. People pass it down for generations. We find the people that are having the most joy and the most fun and they're just in it, they have some kind of sense of purpose around it. And so that's really important. It's interesting, one of the things that we've said to parents that think they might want future kids in the business is watch how much you complain about the business over the dinner table. Because life is hard and you come home, it's like, oh, I had the most challenging day and this is what went on. And those are all real challenges. So you want your kids to hear some of that. But what I hear second generation people saying is, oh no, after sitting at the table and hearing all of that, I was like, well, I'm not getting into this. That sounds horrible. So I remember forcing myself to say to my kids, I want them to hear how much I love my job too. And not because I'm expecting, both of my kids are in medicine. They're not coming into the business, but I wanted them to hear a balance of, yeah, this was a really hard day and here are my challenges, but also I love what I'm doing. I'm lucky to be doing what I'm doing. Those kinds of things. I'm choosing to do this. Otherwise, you have a generation that's like, I don't want to work this hard. This sounds terrible. Why are we doing this? So yeah, watch what you're setting up, everybody. You might think I'm teaching you or you're learning a lesson because I'm telling you what I had to deal with, but it can definitely go too far. At Kolby, I have to give Kathy Kolby so much credit because we started our transition quite a long time ago. And, I tell people, David Kolby and I had worked with Kathy for a while. She had run this business. We're hitting our 50th year this year. And we could see she was absolutely miserable. So we ended up taking her to lunch one day. And we just wanted to give her permission to just go do whatever you wanted to do. We didn't think she would leave the company at that point. We just thought, hey, let us give you the freedom to do whatever it is, because you're clearly in the weeds and the business has gotten to the point where you're doing stuff where it's not fun anymore. And so we take her to breakfast. We were terrified because we were thinking she's going to think we're saying she's not capable or she's old or they're trying to kick me out. I didn't know how she would respond because this is her baby, right? And we really were coming from this generous mindset. So we sat down, we said, listen, we want to give you the freedom. We're getting there. We know we still need your guidance and help, but we really know that we can take over the day-to-day, go do whatever you want to do. And we really thought she would push back. And she looked right at us. She said, thanks, I'll be out in 2 weeks. And we said, what? Our response was like, wow, okay. We did not see that coming. 2 weeks. All right. Let's get on this. And she really did mean it. And there was a little bit of a transition, but the one piece of advice that she always gives founders is when you're going to make that transition. For her, she would say, you have to get out of the building. Like, get out of the building. And we tell a story in our book that played out and it was one of the worst days for me in the transition, but I'm glad it happened because now I have this story for other people where she came back to sign some paperwork. And she had been making the transition. She worked out of another office. She was starting a sister company. That was all going down, but she still was somewhat involved. And so she's in the office, signed paperwork. I said, hey, we're having pizza for the staff meeting. Do you want to stay? So she starts looking up and down the pizza and saying, you didn't order enough meat. And I don't think this is enough pizza. And she starts criticizing my pizza order. I don't even remember at that point if I had done the order or who had done it. But I remember it just was like this trigger for me. I took her into the other room and I said, are we really going to talk about the pizza? Because if you can't trust me to order pizza, you cannot trust me to run your business. And she said, you're absolutely right. I can't be here because being here and seeing the decisions, I know that I can't stay out of some of the things I should stay out of. And so we laugh about it now because from that point on, everything was the question we would ask, is this a pizza level decision? Or is this a higher level decision? So it became symbolic to us of when did we need to bring her back? And by the way, the opposite can happen. If you don't ever use the founder for the brilliance and what they're bringing to the table, that's a huge mistake too. And I would find that every once in a while we were struggling with something, I'd say, we need to ask Kathy about this. So you can also go too far the other way. But what she did was really, we had quite a bit of time working together. We were developing together. She ensured we worked in another business for a long time. We do not believe anyone should go straight into a family business without having a very successful at least few years somewhere else. You need to bring something to the table when you come, which means you've learned something along the way. You need to develop a level of confidence somewhere else, or else, that's not good to bring someone in green right out of college or whatever you might do. But I give her credit for that. And when she said she was leaving and we had the pizza level situation, she was able to step out. However, that does not mean she retired. So one of the things is she still needed an outlet for her amazing talents. So she started a sister organization that we would work collaboratively on things. She would still come and do trainings with us, and she was still represented, but the ability for her to do her own thing and really get back into the zone was great. And it was great for us because all of a sudden we had a freedom while she was still around. And unfortunately, she has just recently passed away. And now we're going through the whole, what does it look like without her at all as a figurehead for our company? So anyway, I say that, feel free to comment or, I'm sure you've seen a lot of the similar things.
This story is so powerful, and I hope a lot of people in family businesses hear that pizza story. And I'm so sorry about your loss.
Yeah.
And so glad that she had the foresight and you had the foresight to have those hard conversations when you did. That is such a beautiful and unusual road that you went down together. And thank goodness, because here you are now without her physically there in the building. You've had practice at that. And without her, a phone call away. Oh my goodness. It's such an amazing piece. I hope people listen to this podcast and they can use that pizza as an example. That story is so good. And it points again to the really knowing yourself. You too, when you took her to breakfast, she knew herself well enough that when you made this generous offer, she could respond. Lots of people don't know themselves outside of their business. And so given that offer, we'll accidentally hear things like, we don't love you, you're not valuable, a whole bunch of things you weren't saying. And then of course, for the two of you to know yourselves well enough to say, we think we've got it. And we see her, we know her, she's not happy. They're on a million levels that I have not put my finger on. There's so many beautiful pieces around this. But I'm trying to point to, I think that central thing is, knowing who you are, knowing what gives you energy, knowing what's not giving you energy, the ability to say, are you really going to talk about the pizza? That's hard. That's hard to say to someone you don't love or you don't have to see at a kid's birthday party or a family reunion. That'd be hard to say to anyone, but to say it to someone you might have to see tomorrow afternoon,
Right. Yeah.
that's a really hard sentence, even though it's pizza, but it's not the pizza.
It's not, yeah, it was definitely not about the pizza. And I think if I hadn't been triggered so much, I wouldn't have had the courage to say, what
Really?
is going on? Yeah, I just kind of hit a level and we laughed, and it was fabulous years later because we could use it. But it was learning for me, it was learning for her. So I give her all the credit of how she handled those things. Let me throw at you a few of the most common challenges we see, and I'd love you can add some into, I want either your commentary or your advice, okay? So I'm gonna kind of rattle off a few, and then you pick any you want to talk about. So here are some of the things we see most. You hire family out of desperation. So when the economy turns, or when you're first a solopreneur, or you just have a few employees, it's so convenient because you trust the person. And by the way, I mean, trust is a really big factor in this. So there's some kind of level of desperation, either because that person needs a job or because you need someone. That's one thing. We kind of talked about not ensuring that it's the right fit. Those go, I think, hand in hand. No boundaries between work and home. And that is everything from what we had talked about before, like you should not call people mom, dad, et cetera, or to speak in a way that's more casual and comfortable than you would in a business setting. But it also is the fact that we never leave work at work. So if you're in a partner relationship and you're at work and then you come home and you're still solving problems together, we kind of put a line in the sand and say, you can vent, because I don't want you to miss out on venting to your spouse if that's what you would do normally, but you can't use mental energy to solve problems, right? So there's just some boundaries that home is home, work is work. I think the other one is a next generation that has not been developed to be resilient or good problem solvers. So people are not planning ahead to develop their next generation to be ready. That's not about the business. That's just about ready to take on some challenges that are going to come from a family business, especially, or from any kind of rapidly growing entrepreneurial type environment. So those are some. We already talked about sticking around too long. Out of any of those, do any of those resonate with you? Would you add some stuff?
The buckets that you just put out there are such good ones. The desperation one is huge. And I have not figured out how to do the research on what I'm about to say. So I don't know if it's true, but I sure do think it's true. I think more family businesses are born during economic downturns than any other time, because kids lose jobs or can't find jobs, or the company has some sort of hard time. I also think family businesses are born when the economy is booming and it's hard to find people. Right? So it's at the top and the bottom of the economy. I just don't know how to do this research. Somebody please tell me.
Sure.
Or somebody do the research and come back and tell me. I think that's when they're born. And it's desperation in both situations. And it is that trust thing on the bottom that I think drives the willingness to make these things that people know are potentially dangerous moves.
Sure.
But it's that desperation move that is actually maybe okay in the beginning, but not done with the boundaries, which is the second thing. Having the clear boundaries about, what if this goes bad? What if you hate working for me? What if I hate you working for me? What if you're not good at this job? What if the business gets worse off and we just can't keep you around, right? All having actual clear boundaries with language, with understandings, with clarity. It's too many family businesses, actually any business, where that one person kind of has the ear of the owner, whether it's a family member or not. And then that person walks around like they're the king of whatever. And then there's this kind of weird dysfunctional friendship thing happening. And it can be very unhealthy, obviously, right? Anybody listening can at least imagine this happening in someone else's business, probably not their own. But the desperation plus no boundaries is like the ultimate explosion of hurt feelings and hurt businesses, right? Like, just if you even want to take the feelings out of it, the money lost in that situation is so monstrous.
Yeah.
I recently heard the story of a construction company that thinks in the second generation there might have been more than $30 million lost because the person running accounts receivable was too scary to discipline. $30 million is what they think, but they don't even know it could be more. That's
That is
terrifying.
crazy. That is terrifying. It's such a huge challenge for the family and the business. Like, you better be ready to handle whatever's coming. It is a huge risk. It seems so safe to hire a family member, but it's actually one of the biggest risks that you can take. That happens a ton. And I always say you better be able to be at work, have a complete disagreement over a decision, and then in the next hour, this has happened to us before, go to a family gathering with extended family, no one know what's going on, and you be able to now be a loving member of a family again. Like, that is the level of boundary that you have to set. That's one of the reasons we called the book Business is Business, because of that. So Sara, let's talk about your strengths, because we didn't get an opportunity to do this yet. I want to talk about you a little bit more. With your Kolby A5691 result, tell me about the time that you got that result, and how have you seen that play out at home or in your business?
I want to do a Colby confession here. I got the 5691 and I thought, there's no way my fact finder is that high. I then signed up for a workshop and took the Colby a second time and was like, I'm going to get the right score. And I did everything I could to get my fact finder lower. Every single thing I could possibly do to get it lower. I did get it to be a 4691. And then the test pointed out to me that I had messed with it. So it's such a smart, the person who talked to me said, Sara, we can see you took it before and now you've done this. We see what you did. So
that's called a transition result, everybody. If you're trying to force a score in a certain way, it's really hard for 72 different responses to be consistent. And so, I picked up on that.
I tried to change it. So that's my confession. But I'll say this, there were two things right away when I got that result. This is before I even took it into my work, but all of a sudden a couple things made sense for me. One of them was, if I could be paid to be a professional brainstormer, I would do it 80 hours a week. And when I saw that result, I thought, well, of course I think that's fun. And I've had plenty of people in my life say, why would that be a fun job? Now I saw, that's why I think it'd be a fun job. My 9 quick start thinks that's the best thing in the whole entire world.
Yeah, you naturally drive ideas and innovation and brainstorming. What's interesting about your result too is you're that 6 in follow through. So you'll take all of your ideas and then you'll put it into some sort of a system or organize it. And I see the pattern of your Kolby result very similar with other EOS implementers, because you're taking a system that already exists and has a solid foundation, but then you're applying it uniquely to each one of your clients, right?
That's
so
a fun thing to hear.
Every workshop day is a different day. Even though the tools are consistent, you have this model and you're very accommodating and follow through to using a system and using a model, but then you'll uniquely apply it in a way to bring success. So you found such an ideal thing to do. I also know you speak a lot. I want to give you an opportunity. So, on this podcast, we've talked a lot about the types of family challenges that understanding your strengths really cover. But I just want to make sure everyone listening knows, first of all, you speak all the time on family business, and you really get down into some of the nuts and bolts about making sure you have all the right legal agreements in place and all of those kinds of things. So do you want to just give us a quick little overview on some of the other areas of expertise that you have with family business?
Thanks for that opportunity. I love to speak on thinking about those 3 circles, the family, the business, ownership. I love to speak on the business, on the side of getting the right people in the right seat, making sure you yourself are in the right seat, making sure you're running a thoughtfully run, healthy, getting as much dysfunction out of it as you possibly can. And then I also love to speak about ownership and thinking about, why do we own it? And how much money do we want from it? And do our legal agreements align with the legacy that we want to create? Unfortunately, so many legal agreements were kind of cut and pasted from something else, and they actually don't help deliver on a vision for the business. And then unfortunately, a lot of them don't get signed too, which is terrifying. You go through all the pain and agony to have the uncomfortable conversations, and then they're not signed. And it can be very, very scary when you lose a family member and there are not signed documents. So I get to talk on that as well on a regular basis. And I like to have fun doing it. Most of this is not very fun stuff to talk about. And it's especially not fun to think about. I like to say, I talk about the most rude things. Like I talk about money, I talk about death, I talk about disagreeing with people you love, right? Like it's the most rude stuff on the planet.
Right.
I skip politics, but only just barely, because often decisions
That
that
might play in too. Yeah.
right? It affects the
Yeah.
financial thing. So, but I try to have fun when I do it, because in the end too, even though this can be the riskiest thing someone could ever do, it could also be the most transformational thing. And I
Right.
think you get to live that. You have lived that life, right? The upside of this is monstrous. For relationships and a parent getting to see their child as an adult and be a colleague, that's a really beautiful thing when it happens in a healthy way.
When you're getting to share in these big goals together and it's someone that you love, that it is huge. It is worth doing if we can figure it out how to do it right. You touched on values really quickly, and or you said something about politics. It made me think about values, and that is, are there any key questions or things you need to ask yourself if you're going to hire a family member to make sure we are aligned on certain kind of values? Because what I found is, just because, let's say, you go to church together and you have those same kind of personal values, there might be some things about the values of how do you spend money in a workplace, or what do we give to employees or not, or I don't know how to get at that, but are there any key questions that you think you need to ask or consider about being aligned in values before you hire someone?
I wish I could magically come up with the questions. I'm not coming up with the questions, but I will say, I think helping all of the family members who work in a business actually understand what it means to own the business makes a huge difference. So I don't magically have the questions here, but lots of people go to work and they think, oh, the company sold a $10,000 project. Now the owner puts $10,000 in their pocket. And for family members to really understand, you sell $10,000, you might be lucky to get 1,000, really lucky
Sure.
to get 1,000. You might really more get $400 out of that.
Mm-hmm.
So when people really understand, here's what ownership means and the massive risk that comes with that. And of course, hopefully magic, interesting. I meant to say massive, but it feels kind of magic too sometimes, right? The big upside that can come with that. So maybe the questions are around, how do you understand how businesses work? When we sell a $10,000 project, how many dollars do you think actually come to the family?
Right.
Helping that next generation really start to understand, what does it actually mean to own a company? That to me is the big morsel. I often ask people, do you own a business or do you own a very stressful job? And unfortunately, a lot of people own a very stressful job. They're not thinking like an owner and getting into that position of actually really thinking about, I own this business. This is an asset. And as a first or second or third or fourth or fifth generation, what do I want to do with that asset? Like, thinking about it like they would think about a home, or I don't know, a piece of art or a cool piece of jewelry or a whatever.
That's a great example, because I do think that there's a lot of learning about the finance. I think sometimes owners are just kind of dealing with their own they almost see it as their personal finances.
Yeah.
But I do remember Kathy taking us to meetings with bankers sometimes along the way. And I was like, oh, I didn't know there was all this other stuff going on, or we're about to take on this huge risk. She wants to invest in something that is absolutely a risk and we know it might not work. Where is that money coming from? Any kind of learning on what it means to be an owner. What does profit really look like? What actually goes into your pocket? Because she was consistently putting money just back into the business, as a lot of times entrepreneurs do, or owners do. And I didn't know that. Like, whatever she was getting paid was just going back in. And that was her choice. And she had figured that out. But I didn't know that for a long time. Yeah, so that's great.
When we talk about succession, I always want to point out to people, there's the succession, like who runs the business day to day. There's also the succession of ownership. And then there's also succession in the family. Every family needs a leader who's keeping the family glued together. And I think it can be hard to teach the family side. It can be hard to teach the business side. The only way I know to learn that ownership side is to sit down with a banker, to look at the numbers, to actually say, to look at a pro forma or a document, or to think through, what does this actually mean? Some other smart people who teach classes might disagree with me and say, oh no, you can learn ownership in a classroom, but I actually don't think you can. I think you have to learn it, physically feel what the risk is like. Yeah. What does this actually mean?
I know that's, I've heard people rail against entrepreneur classes or whatever in college that is taught by a professor who has never been an entrepreneur. These things happen. Okay, so Sara, is there anything that I haven't asked you about your strengths or about family businesses that you want to share that we didn't cover? And I know this could be a 4-hour podcast, but anything else that we should share with all of the listeners?
I learned about the Kolby because as an EOS implementer, it's part of the deal. And my 6th follow through said, I'm going to dig in. What I didn't anticipate when I did that is what a wildly valuable tool this is for family businesses. And this is what I mean. I just want to say it as directly as I possibly can. In family business, business is business. I love that. I agree with that statement. And what I know the reality is for a lot of people is business is personal, even though I don't want it to be that way for them. And business can get personal for sure. And when people really, really, really understand who they are and who each other are, it can take that personal stuff out.
Yes.
And to me, that is a huge gift you can give yourself and give your other family members. And even those who are not family members sitting around the table with you.
It's like a shortcut. It number one is you understand, you don't take it personally when someone is maybe behaving a certain way or is showing that they need a certain thing. But then it's also making sure everyone is doing what they should be doing. Yeah. I mean, David and I really try to stay in our lane. He has certain strengths, and so he stays in his lane. I have certain strengths, I stay in my lane. That makes it so much easier. But by knowing how people instinctively solve problems and make decisions, all of that becomes easier. Yeah, I'm so glad you made that point. Yeah. And it takes the emotion out of things. It certainly can.
Family business is an emotional thing. People are deeply passionate about it, and I think that should continue. But deeply passionate against each other is not in service of anyone involved.
Make sure you've got the exit plan if it doesn't work. But man, if you can do it and do it right, it's unbelievable. It's joyful. I know that we feel so strongly and we're so excited to be in a mission-driven business where we're getting to carry on a legacy of something that Kathy started. We're so passionate about the mission, and that makes it, as hard as it's been to not have her here now, we're able to do that because we were all aligned in where we were going. We've got that, and we're all getting to do it based on our strengths. So I am so lucky to be able to do that. And it doesn't mean it's been easy always along the way, or we're not still learning every day. So Sara, if people want to know more about your work, and I know you've written some books and things too, where should they go to learn more about what you do?
I have a website. It's my name, Sara with no H, Sara, B as in boy, Stern. My name is a sentence. I think that's fun, easy to remember, sarabstern.com.
Great. So sarabstern.com. Thank you again so much. This has been a fabulous discussion. I could do this all day. And thank you for the work that you do for family businesses, because it is so important. The learning that they get from you absolutely can save relationships. I appreciate you being here today. Thank you
for having me. It's really an honor.
And as always, if you want to learn more about Kolby, the best place to start is take your Kolby index or get more information about everything else you can do with Kolby at kolbe.com. That's KOLBE.com. I'm Amy Bruske. See you next time.
Thanks for checking out this episode of Powered by Instinct. This show is brought to you by the Kolbe Corp, a company that helps leaders and organizations thrive using the only instinctive strengths assessment on the market. If you enjoyed this episode, then follow Powered by Instinct wherever you get your favorite podcasts, or join us online at kolbe.com/podcast for all the latest episodes.